When the biggest stars of old Hollywood pass away, their homes turned into treasure vaults. Some held jewels and awards. Others held much stranger things. From hidden rooms to crystal sofas, these discoveries show that fame didn't end when the cameras stopped. Behind the locked doors of mansions and estates, workers found collections that defy belief. Not just scripts or costumes. Entire worlds. Private obsessions. Secret hobbies. Things that never appeared in any magazine spread or studio tour. These were the pieces of life that happened when the spotlights went dark. We're counting down the 16 weirdest things ever found inside old Hollywood celebrity estates. From shocking collections to beautiful obsessions, every one of them tells a story about power, mystery, and what fame really leaves behind. These aren't just vintage Hollywood secrets or celebrity auction finds. They're proof that legends were human, and humans are strange. So let's open those estate doors. Let's look inside the trunks and cabinets. Let's see what old Hollywood really kept. Because sometimes the strangest Hollywood memorabilia isn't what they showed the world. It's what they hid from it. Howard Hughes. Tissue boxes and odd collections. When estate staff entered Howard Hughes sealed rooms, they found something nobody expected. Thousands of tissue boxes, stacked floor to ceiling, arranged by date and type. Jars lined up with military precision. Handwritten instructions taped to every surface. Doorknobs marked with diagrams. Gloves stored in numbered bags. This wasn't clutter. It was a system. Hughes had transformed ordinary objects into a private fortress against invisible threats. Each tissue box represented a moment of control. Each jar held a rule. The billionaire who built empires had spent his final years building rituals instead. The tissue boxes became the most famous symbol of his isolation. But they were just the beginning. Staff found detailed logs, maps of room layouts, protocols for entering and leaving, temperature charts, light measurements. Everything documented, everything archived. A man who revolutionized aviation and film had turned his genius toward something else entirely. Order. Pure, absolute, unbreakable order. The weird Hollywood items found in his estate weren't treasures. They were artifacts of a mind at war with chaos. Evidence of brilliance tangled with fear. Estate staff found order where life had collapsed into ritual. Only in Hollywood could a legend end surrounded by boxes he never opened. Mae West. Diamond-studded sofa. Mae West never did anything small. So when auction teams entered her apartment, they expected glamour. What they found exceeded imagination. A custom sofa embedded with real crystals. Hundreds of them, arranged to catch every angle of light. The sofa wasn't furniture. It was a performance piece. Under lamps, it flickered like a disco ball. Under camera flashes, it exploded into starlight. West had designed it specifically for entertaining photographers and journalists. She understood that every surface in her life was a potential stage. The apartment held other treasures too. Mirrored tables that multiplied reflections. Fringed lamps casting dramatic shadows. Gold leaf frames surrounding portraits of herself. But the crystal sofa remained the crown jewel. Proof that Mae West's persona wasn't an act she turned on and off. It was the architecture of her entire existence. Later owners documented the dime in Hollywood furniture in estate photos. The crystals were real. The craftsmanship was extraordinary. This wasn't camp or kitsch. It was commitment. West had invested serious money into making her home shine as bright as her movies. She didn't sit on a sofa. She sat on applause. When the lights hit that crystal, she was still the star. Even at home, even alone, the sparkle never stopped. Errol Flynn, pirate chest and nautical trinkets. Errol Flynn lived his movie roles until the end. When later owners cleared out his Mulholland farm estate, they discovered proof in the attic. A large trunk filled with nautical oddments. Rolled maps marked with fictional islands. Prop swords still sharp enough to shine. Empty rum bottles with hand-painted labels. Compasses that actually worked. Estate lore reported by later owners describes the chest as Flynn's private treasure vault. He collected pieces from film sets and mixed them with real antiques. The result was a pirate fantasy that lived in his home, a game he never stopped playing. The trunk also held logbooks, navigation charts, letters written in theatrical language to friends. Flynn had signed some of them captain. He'd drawn skull and crossbones doodles in the margins. This wasn't a collection. It was an alternate identity stored in cedar and brass. Hollywood knew Flynn as a swashbuckler. What they didn't know was that he kept the costume on long after the cameras stopped. The maps led nowhere. The swords fought no battles. But they represented something more important, a refusal to let adventure, and just because the script did, a life that sailed off the screen. The trunk stayed sealed for decades. When it finally opened, sea air and cinema dust came pouring out together. Jayne Mansfield, heart-shaped pink bathtub. The Pink Palace was already famous before Jayne Mansfield died, but estate tours and auction photos revealed just how deep the fantasy went. The heart-shaped bathtub wasn't just pink. It was surrounded by pink faux fur walls. Mirrored ceilings reflected everything in duplicate. Neon hearts glowed along the baseboards. Custom fixtures shaped like cupids poured water. Mansfield had transformed her home into a branded set. Every room told visitors exactly who she was supposed to be. Blonde, bubbly, impossible to ignore. The bathtub became the most photographed piece of celebrity estate finds from that era. It appeared in magazines. It launched 1,000 imitators. But looking at the estate inventory reveals something else. Discipline. Everything matched. Everything coordinated. The pink wasn't random. It was calculated. Mansfield knew that her image required constant maintenance. The house was part of that work. The tub came with matching pink towels, pink soaps, pink robes. Lipstick-red vanity tables held perfectly arranged cosmetics. The kitsch was real, but so was the effort. She built a world that reflected her back to herself, a mirror maze of glamour. She lived inside her own billboard. When estate visitors walked through years later, they entered a time capsule. The pink hadn't faded. The heart still glowed. Jayne Mansfield left glamour, and a heart-shaped bathtub that wouldn't let anyone forget. Frank Sinatra, trained Sayar-style bar at his desert estate. Frank Sinatra built something remarkable, a private bar designed to look exactly like a luxury rail. Curved leather boots wrapped around brass rails. Club lighting cast golden shadows across with paneling. The cocktail cart looked like a luggage rack. Even the ceiling mimicked train compartments. This wasn't just vintage Hollywood bar decor. It was transportation frozen in place. Sinatra and the Rat Pack had spent years traveling between cities, clubs, and recording studios. The train represented that golden era of movement and music, so he brought it home. Estate photos show brass footrails polished to mirrors, banquettes deep enough to disappear into, a corner with a jukebox that played nothing but his own records and his friend hits, matchbooks stamped with custom logos, ashtrays heavy as weapons. The bar served a purpose beyond nostalgia. It was a stage. Sinatra performed for friends here just as surely as he performed in Vegas. The train car theme gave everyone permission to keep moving, keep drinking, keep the party rolling. No stops, no stations, just a journey. Later owners preserved the space because it captured something essential. The Rat Pack carriage never stopped rolling. Even when parked in the desert, even when Frank was gone, you could still hear the engine and the laughter and the ice clinking in glasses. Bela Lugosi, Dracula cape and coffin prop. Bela Lugosi became Dracula so completely that he never fully stopped being him. Widely reported estate lore describes how he kept at least one screen-used cape stored carefully with his costume trunks, and beside it, a coffin prop, not stored away in shame, displayed, preserved, honored. Versions of the cape later appeared at auctions and museums. Black velvet, red silk lining, studio tags still sewn into the collar. These weren't just classic horror relics. They were the uniform of transformation. The cape turned a Hungarian actor into an immortal monster. Lugosi understood that power. The coffin prop reportedly came from promotional appearances. Lugosi would climb into it for photos, for publicity stunts, or Halloween events. He leaned into the character when other actors might have run from typecasting. The prop became part of his professional toolkit, a reminder of what made him famous. Estate visitors described the storage area as theatrical. The cape hung on a velvet-covered form. The coffin rested on a low platform. It looked like a miniature set, a shrine to his most famous role. Some called it creepy, others called it genius. He kept the knight neatly folded. When the cape came out of storage decades later, it still held its shape, still carried the weight of 1,000 performances. Dracula never died. He just waited in the dark. Joan Crawford. Labeled cleaning supplies. Joan Crawford's estate revealed something that shocked even Hollywood insiders who thought they knew her. Shelves of cleaning bottles with typed labels. Color-coded mops hung in precise order. Replacement inventory stored in numbered drawers. Housekeeping rules written on laminated cards. Checklists, schedules, standards. This wasn't ordinary tidiness. It was domestic life run like a studio department. Crawford had applied the same discipline she used on film sets to her home. Every bottle had a purpose. Every tool had a place. Nothing was random. Nothing was overlooked. Later inventories showed the extent of the system. Separate supplies for different surfaces. Backup stock organized by expiration date. Instruction sheets explaining proper usage to staff. It was perfection as a daily script. Crawford directed her household with the same intensity she brought to her performances. Some saw obsession. Others saw professionalism. The truth was probably both. Crawford had fought hard to control over a career and image. The labeled bottles were an extension of that fight. She couldn't control Hollywood, but she could control her baseboards. Estate photos show label close-ups. Type, professional. Clear, caddies arranged by room. Folded linen stacked like props in a warehouse. Everything ready. Everything perfect. The celebrity obsessions documented here weren't about cleaning. They were about order in a chaotic industry. Only in Hollywood could cleaning supplies become legend. But Joan Crawford managed it. One labeled bottle at a time. Clark Gable. Hunting Lodge time capsule. Reported by later owners and estate visitors. Clark Gable's Hunting Lodge became one of Hollywood's strangest time capsules. A tucked-away cabin where everything stopped. Cigars still rested in a cedar humidor. Flasks sat on side tables. Monogram stationery waited in drawers. Letters lay half-finished, like Gable had stepped out for a drive and simply never returned. The cabin wasn't abandoned. It was paused. Caretakers and new owners left it mostly untouched for years. They understood they were looking at a private moment frozen in amber. The king's weekend life preserved like a set strike that never happened. Details told the story. Matchbooks from favorite restaurants. A deck of cards mid-shuffle. Hunting rifles cleaned and oiled. Photos of friends pinned to cork boards. Everything suggested imminent return. Gable had clearly planned to come back. Life had other ideas. The cabin represented something important in Hollywood culture. Privacy, escape, a place where fame couldn't follow. Gable had carved out the space away from cameras and scripts. Here he could be himself. Just a man who liked cigars and conversation and quiet. The king paused the scene and never pressed play again. Decades later, the cabin still smells like cedar and tobacco, still feels lived in, still waits. A Hollywood time capsule containing not treasures, but ordinary moments that became extraordinary through absence. Charlie Chaplin, hidden film reels. At his Swiss estate, Manoir de Ban, archival teams made an astonishing discovery. Uncatalogued film reels hidden in storage. Test footage, trims, outtakes, personal recordings. Material that Chaplin had never released, had never shown anyone, had kept locked away like secrets. The lost Hollywood film canisters held treasure. Alternate takes from famous scenes, experiments with camera angles, Chaplin testing new gag ideas. Some reels showed him much older, filming himself for study, learning from his own movements decades after becoming famous. What made the discovery extraordinary was the care. Each was labeled in Chaplin's handwriting. Notes described contents. Dates marked when footage was shot. He'd organized this archive knowing he might never use it, but also knowing it mattered. Knowledge preserved for its own sake. Archival teams later organized and restored portions of the collection. Some footage eventually appeared in documentaries, but much remains private. Chaplin's family maintains control. The reels represent his process, his mind, his methods, Not everything needs an audience. The quiet room where laughter slept held enough material for another career. Chaplin had kept creating even when he no longer needed to prove anything. The camera kept rolling because the genius never stopped. These vintage Hollywood secrets weren't scandals. They were studies. A master still editing from beyond. Marilyn Monroe, locked file cabinet. During initial estate inventories, workers found a locked file cabinet in Marilyn Monroe's bedroom. When finally opened, it revealed the architecture of a life lived in fragments. Manila folders, a tiny address book, lipstick stain notes, personal receipts, phone lists, letter drafts, beauty product notes, professional memos, pills documented with times and doctors. The Hollywood secrets inside weren't scandalous. They were human, evidence of someone trying to organize chaos. Monroe had kept track of appointments, contacts, obligations. She'd written reminders to herself, made lists, tried to stay on top of a life that kept slipping away. The address book showed crossed-out numbers, people who'd moved on, names with question marks beside them, someone she'd meant to call, someone she'd already lost touch with. The private mind behind a public smile worked hard to maintain connections. The book proved it. Other folders held scripts with her handwritten notes, ideas for projects, contracts she'd saved, a paper trail of ambition and effort. Monroe wasn't just a face. She was a businesswoman trying to navigate an industry designed to use her up, the icon's life in small rectangles. Folded, filed, locked. The cabinet stayed sealed for good reason. These weren't treasures for auction. They were the last private pieces of someone who had very little privacy. The lock was her final boundary, a box she controlled, a story she kept to herself. Greta Garbo, secret paintings and self-portraits. Found among her personal effects and later cataloged, Greta Garbo's paintings shocked the art world. Canvases and sketches made in complete solitude, grayscale portraits, and signed works, studies of faces that looked like her but weren't quite. She'd never shown them, never mentioned them, never sought recognition. The most silent stars spoke in paint. Garbo had walked away from Hollywood at the height of fame, spent decades avoiding cameras, lived quietly in New York, and apparently she painted, created visual art that nobody saw until after she was gone. The vintage Hollywood secrets here weren't about scandal. They were about transformation. Garbo had found another way to express what words and acting never quite captured. The paintings showed skill, practice, dedication. She hadn't picked up a brush casually. This was serious work. Estate photos show an easel by a window, natural light, simple setup, canvases stacked against walls. She'd traded dialogue for brushstrokes, traded audiences for solitude. The paintings were never meant for anyone else. They were conversations with herself. Some works eventually appeared in gallery exhibitions. Critics praised their restraint and composition. The same qualities that made Garbo magnetic on screen appeared in her art. Mystery, depth, silence that spoke volumes. She'd left Hollywood, but she'd kept creating, just in a language only she needed to understand. Elizabeth Taylor, private perfume lab. Elizabeth Taylor's estate held an unexpected room, a small workspace filled with essential oils, glass droppers, amber bottles labeled with dates, beakers, measuring tools, handwritten notes describing scent combinations, a ledger tracking experiments. This was her private blending room at home, where she created fragrances long before launching commercial perfumes. The celebrity collections here proved Taylor's involvement wasn't just licensing her name. She actually mixed memories into scent, tested combinations, refined formulas. The perfume empire that followed had roots in this quiet room, in trial and error and personal preference. Notes describe her process, which oils reminded her of which moments. Gardenia for first love, amber for evening gowns, jasmine for spotlights. She wasn't just making perfume. She was bottling emotion, creating scent portraits of experiences. The lab wasn't fancy, just a corner of her home with good lighting and shelf space. But it represented something important. Taylor refusing to be passive. She could have hired perfumers and signed bottles. Instead, she learned chemistry, studied her craft, made the work real. Later commercial perfumes bore her creative stamp. The blends reflected actual choices she'd made in this room. Fans wearing her fragrances were experiencing something she'd personally designed. Not just her image, her actual work. A movie queen moonlighting as a perfumer and making it real. Rudolph Valentino, trunk of love letters. Discovered in storage among costumes and trophies, Rudolph Valentino's trunk held romantic artifacts. Sealed letters, some with wax stamps and unidentified initials. Tied bundles organized by date. Sepia envelopes addressed in careful handwriting. The Latin lover had archived romance like a historian. The vintage Hollywood treasures inside weren't just fan mail. These were personal correspondences. Relationships documented in ink. Some letters have been opened and carefully refolded. Others remained sealed. Valentino had kept them all, stored them, protected them. What made the discovery touching was the care. The leather trunk was lined with silk. The letters rested on tissue paper. Valentino hadn't just thrown correspondence in a box. He'd preserved it, treated it as precious. These were memories worth safekeeping. Initialed senders remained mysterious. Valentino's private life was always complicated. The trunk proved that beneath the screen persona lived someone who valued connection, who saved proof of being loved, who wanted to remember even when remembering hurt. A romance star who archived romance. The trunk stayed sealed for decades after his early death. When researchers finally cataloged contents, they did so carefully, respectfully. These weren't Hollywood secrets to exploit. They were private moments that happened to survive, evidence that even legends needed to be loved, and wanted to remember being chosen. Walt Disney, backyard railroad and blueprints. Walt Disney's Los Feliz home held an engineering marvel, a working-scale railroad called the Carolwood Pacific, live steam locomotive, miniature switches and signals, trestle bridges, tunnels, all functional, all built with his own hands. His workshop held drafting tables covered in blueprints, measurements, sketches, plans for expansions that never happened. This classic Hollywood history item proved Disney wasn't just an executive. He was a builder, a tinkerer, a man who went home after running a studio empire to play engineer in his backyard. The railroad represented pure creative joy, no profit motive, no committee approvals, just a man and his trains. The miniature system was technically sophisticated, real steam power, actual engineering principles. Disney had studied mechanics and built something that worked. Friends and family rode the tiny train during parties. Disney conducted, wore an engineer's cap, became someone else entirely. Magic measured in inches and steam. The railroad inspired Disneyland's trains, but the home version came first. It was personal, private, a hobby that became a calling. The blueprints showed Disney's handwriting, his calculations, his mistakes crossed out and corrected, human proof of genius at play. The workshop and railroad remain preserved. Museums display some blueprints. Disney's at-home system wasn't a theme park ride. It was smaller, more intimate. A billionaire on his knees adjusting tiny rails. His imagination never clocked out, not even on Sunday afternoons. Marlene Dietrich, cataloged shoe room. Marlene Dietrich's estate inventory revealed extraordinary discipline disguised as glamour. Over 500 pairs of shoes, each pair cataloged by color and event. Storage notes attached. Travel checklists naming which shoes went to which city. Matching hosiery swatches filed alongside. Pencil lists updating conditions and needed repairs. This wasn't hoarding. It was professional archiving. Dietrich had treated her wardrobe like a military operation. Every shoe served a purpose. Heels for premieres, flats for rehearsals, character shoes for films. She documented everything because her image depended on precision. The Hollywood fashion collection showed wear patterns. Some shoes had been resold multiple times. Others looked untouched. Boxes carried dates and locations. Berlin, 1931. Hollywood, 1942. Paris 1957. Each pair marked a moment in time, a performance, a conquest. What made the collection remarkable wasn't the quantity, it was the care. Dietrich had maintained the system for decades, never faltered, never let standards slip. The shoes weren't vanity. They were tools, extensions of her body and her art. Elegance, filed and numbered. Later auctions sold portions of the collection. Fans bought shoes their idol had actually worn. Walked in, danced in. The catalog notes went with each pair. Proof that glamour wasn't magic. It was work. Discipline measured in leather and buckles, and boxes marked with her sharp handwriting. James Dean, racing helmet and torn jacket. Found in a small crate stored with personal effects, James Dean's racing gear told a story of passion frozen in time. His helmet, scuffed leather racing jacket. Goggles, race entry forms filled out in his handwriting. Letters exchanged with mechanics and racing friends. Oil-stained papers with lap times and notes about performance. The James Dean memorabilia wasn't carefully preserved museum pieces. It was working equipment. Worn, used, real. Dean hadn't collected racing gear. He'd lived in it. The jacket had cigarette burns. The helmet showed impact marks. This was a young man who'd taken risks seriously, who'd pushed speed beyond safe limits. Letters revealed his technical knowledge. Dean didn't just drive. He understood engines, discussed modifications with experts, studied racing strategy. The correspondence showed respect for craft. He'd wanted to compete professionally, not just as a hobby, as a second career. Estate inventory photos show everything packed together. Helmet resting on the folded jacket. Forms rubber banded with photos. A young star's entire speed life in a few objects. Proof that acting wasn't enough. He needed something faster, something more dangerous, something that made him feel alive in different ways. The sound of engines folded into canvas. The crate stayed sealed for years. When opened, it smelled like leather and oil and ambition, a life measured in acceleration. Dean left behind 3 films and a legend, but this crate held something more honest. Passion that wouldn't fit on screen. Fame fades, but the strange remains. These relics tell stories that movie posters never could. The tissue towers, the crystal sofas, the locked cabinets and hidden canvases. They're proof that old Hollywood was never ordinary. Behind every mansion door was a story, a secret, a dream turned solid. Some items make us smile. Mae West glittering furniture, Walt Disney's backyard trains. Others make us pause. Howard Hughes tissue boxes, Marilyn Monroe's locked files. But all of them share something essential. They're honest, more honest than publicity photos or studio biographies. These objects were kept private, never meant for audiences. They show who these legends were when nobody was watching. These were the 16 weirdest things ever found in old Hollywood celebrity estates. Ranked from tissue box mountains to racing helmets. From diamond sofas to secret paintings. Each one a clue, each one a revelation. Proof that even legends left behind more than movies and memories. They left pieces of themselves. Real pieces. Strange pieces. Human pieces. The mansions are mostly gone now. Torn down. Renovated. Sold. But the objects survived. In auctions. In museums. In private collections. Waiting to tell their stories. Because classic Hollywood history isn't just what happened on screen. It's what happened in attics and workshops and locked rooms. It's what they kept, what they hid, what they couldn't let go. Fame fades. Closets do not. And sometimes the strangest treasures are the ones nobody was supposed to find.